I want to present the future of Filecoin mining, kind of an exploration and some thoughts of what's in progress and what might come in the future. So first off, right now we think about two different main types of mining. There's really storage and retrieval. But I also want to talk about some other things near the end of this presentation that might factor into futures of mining. But first, storage. So the future of storage mining. In the near term, we have a number of different things in progress. We have proving performance improvements. We have some markets improvements, validations, window post improvements, and a bunch of other stuff. But these four main things I kind of want to go a little bit further into. So the coolest thing, the thing that's most exciting is some of the optimization work we've done on pre-commit 1. Recently, Magic used our new pre-commit 1 code to pull off a really, really fast pre-commit 1. And I figured it's worth sharing that he managed an under 2-hour pre-commit 1. I think the time he actually got was 1 hour and 50 minutes. And that's not even with like any sort of like extra, tweaking of the processor or any overclocking or anything. That's just a stock like AMD Ryzen, not a Threadripper, but I think he has a 3900 that he was running this on. So under 2 hours is like crazy fast, which unlocks a lot of things for a lot of people. This means, a miner that is using pretty stock hardware, just like, a normal non-enterprise level hardware can do like pretty significant amounts of proving, which is very exciting. So some of the other mining perf work streams that we're working on is we have some optimizations to pre-commit 2. We're targeting around a 30% improvement there. And there's a bunch of different things that go into that. This is mainly like building Merkle trees. There's some new GPUs coming out that people may have heard about that we're likely going to see some very significant gains on, especially with the growth in the amount of memory those cards have. So, we get more memory and more compute cores. Obviously, we're going to do things more faster and likely to see very significant gains in performance per dollar. On our snark proving speed, so this is commits and window posts and so on, we're targeting a 2 to 4x improvement with some of the work that Supranational is doing for us. This is really exciting. 2 to 4x on the snark improvement is going to mean your single GPU is going to go much farther for the number of proofs that it can compute. We're also working on better scheduling, taking better advantage of existing resources. There's a lot of room to grow here. So, expect the same setup to get much faster as the scheduler grows and evolves. We're also working on market improvements. So, why should you as a miner care about market improvements? Well, improved market, things that make the market better mean you're likely to get more deals. So we're working on improving the interfaces. This is both internal interfaces and like external interfaces for different groups to build on top of the markets, to make better deals, to do all sorts of things that make it easier for clients to store data. We're working on improving transfer performance and in general, like making graph sync and our storage protocols better and faster. We're working on light clients, which means clients can not have to sync the chain in order to make deals, which opens up the door for a lot more use cases than are existing right now. And generally, like focusing on improving the client UX, making it just a better experience overall for people to use and interact with Filecoin will make more people store more files. Better UX, more clients, more deals, generally happier miners, because more deals means more people paying for storage, which is exactly what miners want here. We're also working on optimizing the validation of proofs. So if you guys haven't noticed, it's kind of tends towards being on the expensive side for submitting some of your proofs, especially under congestion. And a lot of this is because, well, verifying snark proofs is really expensive. Like, yes, it's cheaper than doing the work, but still it takes significant amount of time to actually do the work of verifying the snark. And we've been working really hard at optimizing this code. Across the board, we generally have around a 10x improvement to the time it takes to verify different snark proofs. So this is, proof commit, this is for window post, and so on. And this is really exciting. We also are working on some specs actors optimizations that will also reduce the gas usage and cost of submitting these proof commits and so on to the chain. So using, all these things are working on making all the messages you have to send to the chain take less gas, cheaper messages, higher chain throughput, and generally makes, mining much better when you don't have to worry about fees as much. And then the other big thing that we're focusing on is windowed post improvements. So right now, windowed post is secure, but and security was the primary target initially. But now that we have that goal, we need to figure out how to make it much cheaper, much more reliable, much more better for miners. There's a bunch of different directions here. Like one of the directions is that we can find ways of just having to do fewer windowed posts. We can find ways of making windowed posts cheaper. There's a bunch of different directions there where, we can change the construction to maybe be like commit reveal. We can change the ZK snark proof. We can change how the inputs are processed. We can do some pre-computation. There's a bunch of different directions here that the research team is working on. And this is one of our main priorities, is getting windowed posts to be significantly cheaper and like dramatically more robust for everybody. So that's one of our more important things here. So those are all like near-term things. And in the mid to long term, there's a bunch of different work streams we have open to think about, like, what can we do to make mining better? And the main top of mind thing is getting better PoRep schemes. Now, some of you may remember that before launch, there was a lot of talk of switching to a new PoRep scheme. And we didn't end up doing it because it wasn't going to be easy to get it done in time and proven secure and have all the optimizations done. If we would have switched before launch, it would have probably delayed things, significantly. So we decided not to do that and to ship SDR. SDR is secure. Many people have hardware dedicated to SDR, and that works well. But newer PoRep schemes are going to allow us to do a lot of things. So I'm going to go into that. And there's other things like PoRep ASICs, potentially offline sectors where you can you can seal a sector and not have to windowed post it very often. This will have different security properties, but and potentially like being able to update the data in a sector so that people can have more mutable data on Filecoin. And there's a bunch of different ideas that will make mining better overall. So diving in a bit to at least one of those things, new PoRep schemes, there's a lot of thought and direction that goes into this. And the hardest part really tends to be finding something that can be made secure, which is why we ended up with SDR in the first place. But as as our understanding and knowledge and research in the space has grown, we have found, a bunch of different directions that should result in secure PoReps. And so with those opportunities, we need to figure out what is our actual design space? What are the considerations we're looking for here? And really the main thing is we want cheaper hardware requirements per terabyte sealed. And, basically the proofs need to be much cheaper per terabyte. We want fast unsealing. Ideally, the way that the PoReps are constructed make it easier for posts. And also, we should consider that miners have lots of existing hardware and that we want to take advantage of the existing hardware and not have to have people go and buy, a whole bunch of new different hardware. That would be pretty bad. And even if the PoRep was significantly better, it might not be the right thing for the network at this point. And at the bottom line, we want to design a PoRep that ends up with the result of most money that people invest in mining Filecoin gets spent on disks, not on compute power, not on CPUs, GPUs, and so on. You shouldn't have to have thousands of sealing rigs in order to have a mining operation at scale. You really just want to have thousands of disks because Filecoin's about storage. Filecoin's not about compute, and that's the direction we're heading. So yeah, and with that, go on to the future of retrieval mining. So retrieval mining right now, it works and you can retrieve data, but it's, there's not a market yet. There's not a lot of the fleshed out, pieces around that. So there's a bunch of different directions that we're looking into here. But some of the main ones here that I'm gonna, dive into a little bit is, some standalone retrieval miner software, where right now we have the same piece of software for storage mining and block production, consensus, participation, and everything is also wrapped up with your retrieval mining. And maybe it seems like it could be a lot better if we had a dedicated piece of software for retrieval mining. Additionally, we're working on some browser-based retrieval clients. We're looking into aggregators and market utilities. We're working on better discovery, figuring out how clients who want to retrieve data can find the data to be retrieved. And also another very relevant component to retrieval is part of the PoRep schemes we talked about before is more efficient unsealing. Storage miners storing the data should be able to unseal that quickly and get the data back to clients. So the standalone retrieval, something hypothetically called Lotus Retrieval Miner, be a piece of software focused entirely on serving retrieval data. The idea here is that you have something that's as thin as possible that just serves data for Filecoin. You give this, would ideally give you fine-grained control over the content that you are, that you're serving, allows you to have different controls over who serves what, and maybe some ACLs or payment controls. Very easy to load content into so that you can just add a bunch of data that people might want to your retrieval miner, and more detailed APIs for controlling and scripting and really programming around this whole process and automating a lot and making this a really nice, easy platform to use. So this is, not something we've really started yet, but it's on the list of stuff that we're really excited about for retrieval mining. Another thing that we're working on is browser retrieval. So being able to retrieve data entirely in the browser, just within a web page, go through and retrieve data from a miner, which is kind of moves towards the dream of having this really nice incentivized CDN where you pay Filecoin to have very fast, instantaneous, web browsing experience. And yeah, so Jim Pick has a really cool demo where he's compiled all the retrieval protocols into WebAssembly and has it running in a browser. I'll post a link to that demo in Slack afterwards, but it's really, really exciting so that you can just in your browser go and request data and pay in Filecoin for data without even running a Lotus node. And all sorts of other interesting things to improve upon retrieval mining, like aggregators and market utilities, better discovery to make it easier for clients to find and fetch their content. Right now, if you know which miner has your data, you can go ask them and get the data and pay for it, right? But in general, we want to enable situations where clients of the market don't have to go and specifically know which miner has their data. They want to just be able to look for data, and as they need it, find it and pay for it and download it. And we need to look at building utilities that make that better. And so a lot of that work is being done by different groups. I think Textile has some work in this direction and so on. So there's a lot of exciting stuff there. And then more efficient unsealing so that storage miners who are currently storing data can more easily unseal the data on demand. Right now with SDR, if you are a storage miner storing data, you either have to store a second copy of the data to be able to serve it quickly, or you have to unseal the data from the sector, which is moderately expensive. It's a similar process to actually sealing the data in the first place. So doing that is not right now is not super cheap, and so future PoRep schemes may make this better for us. And so that's storage mining and retrieval mining. So what else is there? There's a bunch of different ideas out there. Early on, people who have been following the Filecoin project for the past few years may remember the discussion of repair mining. And this would be an actor in the network who accepts your data, you make deals with them, and they store your data redundantly. And if any of the redundant pieces of that data go down, those miners drop their sectors or something, that miner would be on the hook for re-replicating the data. And so this would be a miner on the network whose job it is to make sure your data is properly replicated and stays online over time. And this could be an entirely separate job because maintaining a very large set of data redundantly across this network requires significant amounts of attention. If miners go down, you're trying to get really cheap deals so that you're paying the lowest you can for the miners, but sometimes those miners are maybe less reliable. Well, the repair miner would be able to abstract over that and just fix things as they come up, and you'd pay a small premium to them to make sure that all works. And that's kind of providing some redundancy services to the network. Other things is, well, Filecoin uses payment channels a lot for retrieval and generally just payments in the network. We could have Lightning node type payment channels or payment channel networks that miners can earn. Miners, since they already have a bunch of payment channels open and around to them, could form a payment channel network and do like routing and earn fees that way, which is pretty cool. Another idea is that we could have some form of hot storage where right now when you store data on Filecoin, it's kind of like a cold storage. You store the data and it gets sealed and it gets stored, and then that data is there and you can't really change it. We could work on different mining schemes where you send your data to somebody and they just keep that data around, and then they can prove it to you on demand, but they don't necessarily seal it immediately, which would allow you to change it. And so you could have fast, like a very fast, like mutable storage from miners that allows you to have more like scratch space and changing, and makes it much easier to update data than the current way STR works. There's a bunch of more stuff in this direction. I didn't really have time to brainstorm as much as I wanted to because I was making these slides today. So definitely more to explore here. And yeah, that's the end of my slides, and I'm excited to open up Q&A and answer people's questions and field anything anybody's curious about. So
Ricardo speculates about how it'd be cool to do a deep learning algorithm for miners to choose hot or cold storage, and wonders if that could be done in PowerGate. What do you think?
Yeah, that seems interesting for PowerGate to do. Definitely discriminate on like which, for a given client, should the data be sealed immediately or should it wait longer, and what's the best outcome for everybody. I think that could be something miners could provide, or it could be abstracted through PowerGate.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, I'll say, Ricardo, the PowerGate folks can also be found in the public Filecoin Slack, and are also very open to ideas and suggestions. So it might be something to share with them. Yongjun Liu asks, will the cost of mining be reduced in the future?
Yes, absolutely. One of the biggest considerations for storage mining improvements is how do we reduce the cost of storage mining. So this is generally falls down to how do we make the hardware required to seal data as cheap as possible. Because as I said, what you want is for the money you invest in Filecoin to mostly go to disks. You want to be able to, if instead of buying a ton of sealing hardware and all these like fancy AMD processors and a few disks, you want to buy like thousands of disks and maybe 2 sealing machines. So yeah, like a lot of the new PoRep designs that we're investigating are specifically trying to make sealing cheaper and mining in general cheaper.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm sure that's good for lots of people listening in to hear.
Yes.
A question from the same individual about whether we'll have a Windows version of the mining program.
Oh yeah, we'll get there. Right now, the bottleneck is the proofs code is difficult to compile on Windows.
Mm-hmm.
I think, well, that and nobody on our team is really that competent with Windows. We all either use Linux or Mac, and so having somebody who's who knows a lot about Windows development to maybe help us debug a few things would be beneficial. So if you are that person, if you know a lot about Windows, then stop by and let us know.
Fair enough. Yeah, I don't see any more questions. We can hang out for a couple more minutes and see if folks want to put a couple more questions in chat.
Yeah,
it's a good opportunity to pick Jeremy's brain.
Yeah, Are you? Is there anything you're excited about for the future of Filecoin mining?
I'm excited for the rest of Liftoff week, honestly, and that's what everyone else should be excited about as well. That is a question worth asking, though. Like, what's your most out there idea for Filecoin? what was so out there that you did bother talking about it in your presentation itself?
Is there anything? I mean, there's all sorts of future crazy things like that aren't that crazy, honestly. But like one of the potential futures is more chain sharding, or like splitting the Filecoin network into like subnetworks, so that you can have you can increase the scalability a lot. So like Ethereum is talking about sharding a lot, and I think there's a lot of interesting work in the sharding direction that Filecoin, as a not necessarily proof of work chain, might have a fairly easy time doing, since Filecoin has registered power where like your effective hash rate is registered on chain. It makes it a bit easier to do sharding type setups, because you can't power hop between networks as easily, which tends to be a problem with some of those things. So,
yeah.
So that's one of the things I didn't discuss, but is interesting to think about.
Yeah. Speaking of a closer to ground solution to the scalability question, I think there's been lots of discussions about snapshotting the Filecoin chain, because as you may have noticed, it grows pretty quickly. When do you think that will become absolute unavoidable? Essentially, what's your expected timeline for that?
Oh, I think we're gonna do what I mean. We already recommend people use snapshots as their primary way of syncing. But I think doing an official, like, this is the new quote unquote Genesis, we probably should be doing that in the next couple months. Okay. It's getting pretty near term immediate. The chain, I think, takes up 400 gigs on my machine right now, which that's a lot. So we need to figure out how to clean that up. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's big because the Filecoin chain state is big. Like we have 600 petabytes right now. Each sector of that has to submit their proofs to the chain, and those proofs are part of the the chain, because in order to validate the chain, you need the messages containing those proofs. So your full chain archive includes what is it, millions of proofs by now. How many snark proofs do we have in Filecoin right now? It has to be in the millions.
Yes, almost definitely.
Yeah, and I think we send, like, the network processes over 1 million messages per day right now. So if each message is like several hundred bytes, that's hundreds of megs a day in just the messages, not counting the blocks and the state.
But I guess the question is, do you think that's a problem with the design of Filecoin itself, or do you think it's perfectly fine to like challenge the kind of blockchain puritanical idea and say, no, it's fine to snapshot regularly, like there's nothing valuable being lost by doing so?
I mean, blockchains are all about community consensus, right? And so if the community agrees that at height X, this was the tip set, there's no reason to not snapshot at that point. The only reason the Puritans the Puritans are like, no, you can't snapshot, is because they have this weird idea that if somehow a heavier chain came along, that everybody would switch to it. So like the Bitcoin people will say, if somebody forked Bitcoin from Genesis and somehow managed to mine a like longer chain Bitcoin, that everybody would somehow switch to that. And that's just ridiculous.
Because that's several years of real economic activity that you'd be undoing and doing so? Or
many years of real economic activity that you're just like, nope, that didn't happen. I mean, even like shorter forks, like we have our finality in Filecoin set to 900 blocks, which is what, 4.5 hours?
Yeah.
Even doing a fork of 4.5 hours, you're potentially erasing 4.5 hours of economic activity, that's scary, right? Like,
right.
If you just said like, oh yeah, all transactions that happened in the world for the past 4.5 hours, sorry, those didn't happen. They happened differently. Like that's crazy.
Yeah.
These sorts of things, I don't know. We need much tighter bounds on finality in general. And once something's final, there's no reason not to checkpoint it.
Yep, I think I agree. Here's another question.
Oh, we have new questions there.
Yeah, and there's one that I think kind of comes up a lot, and so I think I'd like to address, which is, do you see Filecoin being potentially used as a data availability layer for other blockchains that are doing different things?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think like we want Filecoin to host the Filecoin chain. Like, sure, we'll checkpoint, but I think we should keep all the historical chain data, but just store it in Filecoin. Like, you know, have the network itself contract miners to store itself.
Right. Yeah.
You know, you can do this cheaply by just like having some random person store the chain data with miners. Yep. But I think there should be some interesting stuff in the future where the network automatically like places deals with miners to store data.
Yeah, it's almost like a new block reward mechanism, except it's storing itself. And obviously, Filecoin is an obvious platform to try something like that. One question that I don't fully understand is, will the miners involved now have no advantage in the future?
It's interesting. So it depends on like what scale of future you have, because the miners now have existing power, right? And so, you know, what do you call an advantage? Obviously, a miner right now who has 20% of the power of the network is going to have 20% of the power of the network, mine 20% of the blocks, and, you know, get 20% of the block rewards. Well, that is an advantage. But in terms of, do they have an unfair advantage in the future? I think generally no, because as things change and as things evolve, like you know, for example, existing miners have already purchased their hardware. If you're a new miner and, you know, you're joining, you get to purchase the most, you know, the most recent, most like new efficient hardware. Like, for example, the new AMD processors that were announced, we're estimating that with that new like 5950X processor, we think we can probably hit under an hour and a half on pre-commit 1, which is, you know, significantly faster than the current best that we've seen. And so like, and also the price per, you know, whatever unit of these processors is the same, or, you know, roughly the same as the previous generation. So with each new generation of hardware that comes out, a miner joining has like a significant advantage in terms of investment costs on previous miners. So like, that's one small thing of how like new miners have an advantage.
Right.
But yeah, there's not really any like unfair baked in advantage to being an existing miner, other than the fact that, well, you're an existing miner, you have your stuff figured out, you have operational experience, you have like, you know, the know-how of how Filecoin works, which that's an advantage. But it's
kind of rephrasing a bit, it sounds like you're saying you have kind of like some softer real world advantages potentially, but like the system itself only awards you for having been an older miner, in that you were more active for that period when others weren't around. But there's no historical advantage that kind of carries over time. Indeed, it might almost be a disadvantage. Is what you're saying? Yeah, cool. We've got a couple more minutes.
I see one from Ricardo here.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's asking what channel on Slack I'm going to post Jim's browser project. I'll probably just post that in the lobby. Gotta grab a link from him. I was going to post a link in the in my slides, but it's an IPFS hash, and I'm not sure that's super useful to put in the slideshow.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sounds good. I'll remind everyone that in the spirit of asking questions, we're hosting a bit of an impromptu Ask Me Anything session starting in 2 minutes. So you can check out the Phil AMA channel in the public Filecoin Slack for details about that. It's another great opportunity to ask questions of the team more broadly. There'll be engineering folks there. There'll be folks from BD and operations. So be sure to check that out, especially if you have burning questions you'd like to ask us. But I think with that, we can probably call it for tonight. Thank you very much, Y, for hosting the session, and thank you everyone for attending. I hope it was informative. We've got 3 days of Liftoff week left and a ton more content. So be sure to stick around. Thank you for being a part of this journey, and I hope everyone's excited.
Yeah, thanks everybody.